Right, tens of thousands of people are expected to march in Washington D.C. to denounce racism and protest against police brutality. The march will also commemorate the anniversary of the March of 1963, where civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. made his "I Have a Dream" speech. For more now on this, let us cross live to our SABC News correspondent there, Nick Harper. He's in Washington D.C. for us. A very good afternoon to you, Nick. Thank you so much for coming through. So give us the latest.
Well, good afternoon. Things are beginning to heat up here in Washington, D.C. As you can see, people are streaming behind me, heading all the way up to the Lincoln Memorial. That is where we've already had a couple of hours of speeches, and another 3 hours or so of speeches are expected. People have been arriving here since very early this morning, around dawn, queuing for several miles to make sure that they can get a spot at what is billed to be a historic event today. An opportunity to remember what Martin Luther King stood for and what he said in that iconic "I Have a Dream" speech 57 years ago, but also a chance to raise their voices and to have their message heard that the racism in the United States that still exists today has to end, and the police brutality that's carried out against many African Americans by white police officers also has to end.
All right, so let's just reflect a bit, Nick, on the speeches that were delivered during that pre-program.
So we've already heard from a number of speeches, but the headline speakers are still an hour or so away. We're expecting to hear from Reverend Al Sharpton. He is a very prominent African-American civil rights leader here in the United States. He will be speaking, as will be the eldest son of Martin Luther King. We're told that he is likely to expound on his father's legacy, that idea of non-violence and calling for racial inequality to end. But we'll also be hearing from the families of victims, of people who've been killed by police brutality. Among them, we'll be hearing from George Floyd's family. George Floyd, of course, was the African-American who died at the hands of police when they knelt on his neck in Minneapolis about 3 months ago at the end of May. That's sparking the last 3 months of protests right across the United States. But we'll also be hearing from the family of Jacob Blake. He was shot 7 times in the back at the weekend on Sunday in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He hasn't died, but he is paralyzed from the waist down, we're told. And he continues to be held, handcuffed and shackled to a bed in hospital, something that his father has spoken about. He's very unhappy that his son, even though he cannot walk, is being chained there to the bed. And we're likely to hear from family members like that during the course of the day, speaking out to remember their families, but also calling for an end to that level of police brutality that we sadly so often see across the US.
Now, what sense are you getting from the participants? What are the people present there saying regarding this particular march, the police brutality as well?
Well, they have high expectations for today. The hope from organisers, at least, is that they'll have somewhere in the region of 50 to 100,000 people showing up during the course of today to hear the speeches, but then to march to the statue that's probably less than a mile in that direction, the statue of Martin Luther King himself. Many of the people here, you may be able to see behind me, they're wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts. They're wearing t-shirts emblazoned with the names of people who've been shot and killed by police officers in recent years. And they are all asking that that police brutality has to end. They're hoping that by magnifying their voices and having it happen here in the capital of the United States, less than a mile from the White House in that direction, that they will be able to get out a very unified message, a unified voice, that racial inequality, that racism, that police brutality, all of that needs to come to an end. And of course, they're saying that if there were to be another 4 years of President Trump in the White House, none of those things would change.
And we know that this march takes place in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. Talk to us about the protocols and perhaps how the organizers of the march will ensure the safety of those attending the march, because we're starting to see a whole lot of people right behind you. It looks like long queues are already forming there. In terms of the COVID-19 protocols, are people adhering?
Well, certainly it's something that organisers have taken very seriously. I would say that nearly every single person that I've seen today, with the exception of maybe just one or two, have been wearing a mask. And that is something that not just organisers, but the city's mayor says must happen. There is a citywide order from the DC Mayor, Muriel Bowser, saying that people must wear masks when they're out in public. The speakers that we've heard have a couple of times reminded people to try and socially distance from one another, to stay 6 feet apart, which is of course slightly difficult. But people are also having their temperatures taken before they come into this area. Because remember, African American communities have been hit particularly hard by this pandemic. Here in Washington D.C, the statistics show that out of every 100 people who've died, about 74 or 75 of them are people of colour. So 3 out of 4 deaths here in the D.C. area are people of colour, having been hit very hard by the pandemic. Of course, organisers wanting to ensure that they're doing everything that they can to allow people to protest, to allow people to get out their message, but also to do that safely.
All right, that's where we'll leave it for now, but we'll surely come back to you as soon as those proceedings get underway. That's our SABC News correspondent, Nick Harper, live to us from Washington, D.C.